that now. And so, yeah, I just want to welcome everyone. Good evening, and even though it's still light out, it is evening. Welcome to the April of 2022 Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate Convo. The first thing that I want to get to is just to introduce myself, which is that I'm Mags Bell. I am the program manager for Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. And I'm really excited that you all are here. And I want to thank our presenters who are going to share a lot of great information and support us in getting more involved in the work towards clean transportation in Minnesota. So more on all of that in just a bit. But first, what I would like to do just briefly before we get into the event is, so I realize that we're in a digital format right now, but I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that even though we're in that digital space, we are all somewhere physically at this moment. And for many of us, we are in what is currently called Minnesota. So depending on where in the region we are on Dakota or Anishinaabe land. And if we're not members of those indigenous groups, then we are on the land that was stolen from them. And so whether we descend from settlers or came here, we're forced here due to broader implications of settler colonialism, we are guests on this land. And I realize we can't acknowledge what has happened just by doing a land acknowledgement, but we can work towards a world wherein we honor the rightful guardians of the land that we're on and strive to be in balance with those people, the land, and all its inhabitants. So I just would love if we could take a moment before we get started to reflect on this, and also on all the opportunities that are going to be presented this evening that could move us towards that balance. So let's just take a moment. Okay, thank you so much. So again, like I said, tonight we have several amazing presenters, and I can't wait to see what they have to share. Before we get into that, I'm going to start us off with just a really short video, because we are health professionals and we focus on health impacts. I'm going to show an HVAC video that's 3 minutes long on the health impacts of air pollution that are tied to our transportation system, and then Pallavi will get us rolling with the panelists. And just want to note that we're going to have someone speak, and then we'll have a brief amount of time for specific questions for those speakers. And then we'll have a big Q&A at the end. But that way you won't forget your question, hopefully. So let's start with a video, and then we'll get into the speakers. All right.
Like most Minnesotans, I love spending time outdoors. But I saw a report from our pollution control agency that said air pollution contributed to the deaths of 2,000 to 4,000 Minnesotans in a single year. Am I at risk?
Even though Minnesota has good air quality overall, we are still seeing health effects from air pollution. And climate change is...
I'm sorry, y'all, is the screen not sharing properly?
No, we can't see it.
I'm so sorry. Let's try that again. I always feel like with videos, it's because you can't see the share. You can't tell if it's working. Is that better?
Yes.
That's great, thank you.
Like most Minnesotans, I love spending time outdoors. But I saw a report from our pollution control agency that said air pollution contributed to the deaths of 2,000 to 4,000 Minnesotans in a single year. Am I at risk?
Even though Minnesota has good air quality overall, we are still seeing health effects from air pollution. And climate change is predicted to further worsen our air quality in the coming decades. However, not everyone is affected the same by air pollution. Doctors consider 3 different factors to know who is at risk and how to reduce that risk. Vehicles and other mobile equipment account for about half of overall air pollution in our state. Exhaust from vehicles has harmful pollutants. These pollutants can flare up asthma and cause heart attacks and strokes. People living near busy streets and highways are exposed to more pollution. And pollution isn't just a city problem. Rural Minnesotans are getting hurt by air pollution too. In our state, people who live in low-income communities, indigenous communities, and communities of color suffered the worst impacts of air pollution. Certain groups of people are more at risk to the harms of air pollution than others. For example, children breathe more number of times a minute and spend more time outdoors, so they take in more air pollution. Let's say you have asthma or heart disease. The same level of air pollution hurts your health more than someone who is healthy. The risks from air pollution can be decreased by taking steps to protect yourself or by improving your adaptive capacity. There are several things you can do to protect yourself and your family from the harms of air pollution. Check the air quality at Air Now before you go outside. If the air quality is poor, stay indoors if possible. If you have asthma, carry your inhaler with you at all times. Make an asthma action plan with your doctor. Talk to your doctor about how you can protect your health from air pollution.
This helps put my mind at ease. I'm healthy and live close to a park. I also have a doctor and health insurance if I need medical attention. So my risk is lower. Is that right? But this has got me thinking, doctor. What about the rest of Minnesotans who are sick, who live in areas with high air pollution or do not have access to healthcare?
That is a great question. There are some Minnesotans who are at higher risk because of who they are, where they live, or how much money they make. This is why we at Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate use our voices to work with our lawmakers to create clean air for all. If you are a health professional and want to take action, join us at www.hp4hc.org. If you want to find out more, ask your healthcare professional about how climate change might impact your health and what our healthcare systems are doing about it.
Awesome. All right. Pallavi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Pallavi, I use she, hers. I'm the intern at HPHC. And so we're so glad that you're able to spend some time out of your busy day to be here with us. So the topic this evening is we're going to be discussing about clean transportation. And as the video just summarized, that we know transportation ranks as one of the largest and fastest growing sectors of greenhouse gas emissions in the country. We also know that air pollution from transportation impacts the health of our communities, especially those that are BIPOC and low income and don't have any other options. And since we see this impact of climate and health, we find it especially important to discuss clean transportation and other equitable solutions, which is what we plan to do here today. So first up, we have Anjali Bains and MK Anderson from Fresh Energy. So Anjali is the lead director of energy access and equity at Fresh Energy, and she will be reviewing the recent regulatory decisions related to electrical vehicles at the Public Utilities Commission. And then we have MK Anderson, who is the senior policy associate from Fresh Energy, and we'll be talking about electrical vehicle policies and other issues at the state legislature. So whoever is first, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can go ahead first if that's all right, Anjali. I think Meg's is going to share my slides really quick here. Okay. So, hi there, my name is MK Anderson, and I'm here on behalf of Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a nearly 30-year-old nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to achieve equitable carbon neutral economies. So I am a senior policy associate for Fresh Energy, where I focus specifically on clean transportation. Today, I'll be giving a brief overview of what's been considered by the state legislature this legislative session, and my wonderful colleague Anjali will give an overview of what's happening at the PUC. Next slide, please. So the first few topics I'll talk about fall under the larger clean transportation category. First, the House Energy and Climate Committee's omnibus bill, which is just a fancy way of saying budget bill, allocates $20 million in matching funds for the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Job Act funding. So this will really enable more entities to apply for this funding that might not have been able to have these matching funds otherwise. Next, the Clean Fuel Standard was introduced in the House Energy and Climate Committee for an informational hearing. This policy, if enacted, would require that the carbon intensity of transportation fuels supplied to Minnesota be reduced by at least 45% below a 2018 baseline level by the end of 2030, be reduced by 80% by the end of 2040, and 100% by the end of 2050. The Consumer Choice of Fuels Act was introduced in the State Senate Government and Finance and Policy Committee. So this would actually take away the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's power to adopt the clean cars rules that were passed last year. And then the Reconnect Rondo project. So the Senate Transportation Committee included a provision in their omnibus bill that would ban state money from going to this project. So a little bit of background here. Some decades ago, the Rondo neighborhood was predominantly Black middle-class neighborhood. And due to racist policies like redlining, when I-94 was built, it was routed directly through the middle of this neighborhood. The community wants to build a land bridge over I-94 to help start reconnecting that neighborhood. And last year, an agreement was reached to provide $6.2 million for preliminary planning for this project in a tax bill. So the provision that was introduced this session would walk back that agreement of giving $6.2 million to the project and prohibit any money from being allocated to this project from the state in the future. Senator Marty did offer an amendment to that that would have repealed this provision, but the amendment did not pass. So the provision is headed to the floor for discussion. And then finally, last year, a bill allowing for the sale of E15 or 15% ethanol mixed with gasoline. This bill would allow that to be sold year round. Currently, it's sold seasonally. It has not been brought back up this year, but we know that it might end up in an omnibus bill during negotiations. Next slide, please. And the remaining topics all relate to electric vehicles. So the House Transportation, Finance, and Policy Committee's omnibus bill allocates $20 million for electric bus rebates. That same bill also includes a provision that would allow for the installation of electric vehicle charging as a commercial activity at certain rest areas. So what that means is basically you could install an electric vehicle charging station and charge for the electricity that is provided through that charging station at certain rest areas. Now, the impact of electric vehicles on the road use tax fund has been of interest this session. So for some background, the road use tax fund is funded by the state gas tax, and it's how we fund construction and maintenance of our bridges and roads. But as vehicle fuel efficiency has increased, the amount of money going into the road use tax fund has decreased in response to people needing less gasoline and diesel. So with all of that in mind, there are some people that are worried that as we transition to electric vehicles, the road use tax fund will diminish at a greater rate. So, you know, that totally makes sense. They want EVs to quote unquote pay their fair share of their use of the roads and infrastructure. And I think that most of us would agree. But a lot of the times what's forgotten when this position is argued is that EV owners already pay an additional registration fee each year of $75 that goes directly to the road use tax fund to tackle this exact problem. Okay, so now back to the legislative session. There have been 2 bills introduced related to EVs and the road use tax fund. One was included as a provision in the Senate Transportation Omnibus Bill. This significantly increases the annual EV registration to $250 compared to the current $75. So this would really stifle electric vehicle growth in the state as it prices people out of EV ownership. And the other bill that is offered as an amendment to the Senate Transportation Omnibus Bill, and this would establish a pilot program to assess the success of a mileage-based fee system for for vehicles on the road. So instead of paying per gallon or paying at a registration fee, they would pay per mile that they actually drove that year. And then one thing we wanted to mention that has not come up yet this year is the topic of personal vehicle rebates. So Fresh Energy recognizes that personal vehicle rebates are going to be needed, whether they come from the federal government or the state government. And we're working to move this, as well as the other issues discussed tonight, forward, but it has not been brought up this year yet. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague Anjali.
Wonderful. Mags, you think I could be co-host just to be able to share my screen?
Try to share your screen. You should be set.
Great.
It should be set up, but let me know if you can't.
Okay. Nice. Okay. All right. Thank you, MK, for giving that legislative background. So here at Fresh Energy, we do policymaking in a few different venues. So in addition to work in the state legislature to pass policies that support EV adoption and access and affordability of electric vehicles, we are also working in regulatory spaces, primarily at the Public Utilities Commission, to influence and support utilities in proposing their own pilots and programs to support adoption. And just to start with some backgrounds for folks here, just in case you didn't know, you find this interesting. Here in Minnesota, the Public Utilities Commission, or PUC, opened up an investigation into electric vehicles back in 2017 and really asked utilities and all parties like yourselves and advocates, how should utilities, or really should utilities, be supporting electric vehicles? And if so, how should they be supporting electric vehicles? After a lot of comments and inputs from a lot of different people, we found that overwhelmingly that yes, utilities have a role to play in supporting EV adoption. And they actually issued an order in 2019 that required utilities to go ahead and propose EV programs that both supported EV adoption more broadly, primarily through charging infrastructure and supporting public charging, as well as ensuring beneficial integration of electric vehicles into the electric grid. And this specifically refers to the fact that electric vehicles, while they are indeed a climate solution, they are even more so in a climate solution when they are beneficially integrated into the grid, which means using electricity powered by renewables like solar and wind, and also being used or being charged up at a time when the electric grid is using the least amount of resources, so that the EVs are basically coming in and filling in the gaps rather than adding to the overall load or kind of stress on electric grid. And the reason why that's important is because we have existing power generation already. So by electric vehicles coming in and charging primarily overnight when there's less demand, that means no new power sources have to necessarily be generated. And incidentally, in Minnesota, overnight is also when a lot of wind energy blows. So charging overnight also tends to utilize that available wind energy instead of requiring new, perhaps, natural gas plants being built. So that's what meant by beneficial integration. I'll also note that the PUC has jurisdiction over only investor-owned utilities in the state. And since we're talking about electric vehicles, it's really only the investor-owned electric utilities we're talking about here. So that's Minnesota Power up in Duluth and northern Minnesota, Xcel Energy, which surrounds Twin Cities, as well as other pockets in kind of central part of Minnesota, and then Otter Tail Power, which has parts of sort of the rural western parts of Minnesota, as well as North Dakota and South Dakota. So those are the IOUs, or investor-owned utilities, that we're talking about here. There's also a lot of electric cooperatives and municipal utilities in Minnesota. We're not going to cover them in detail here, but some of them are doing work to support electric vehicles, although it's much more variable across the different munis and co-ops. Some of them are likely to offer low-cost electricity rates for those who have electric vehicles, or other sort of time of use rates that support electric vehicle charging overnight, as I mentioned. But then some utilities also have some rebates or support in terms of charging infrastructure, but some co-ops munis have also not done the planning. So it is much more sort of widespread on the munis and co-op side, but we won't be focused on that here today. The good news is that after 5 years of this PUC-led action, there's a lot of things happening at our major utilities. So I'm gonna start with the biggest one, Xcel Energy. Xcel has proposed a number of pilots and programs in the last few years. The first and kind of one of the biggest ones was a public charging pilot that they proposed that really sought to put curbside level 2 charging infrastructure around the Twin Cities. This was also incidentally meant to support the electrification of a nonprofit car sharing entity in the Twin Cities, Our Car. And in fact, earlier this year, Our Car announced it was launching EV, as it's called, EVIE, which is this EV car sharing service. And those EV car sharing will be paired with Xcel's installed level 2 chargers that were approved in this case back in, I want to say 2016. So it's been a while. They've been working hard to install these charging hubs. I believe there's about 70 charging hubs planned under this. And while they only have about probably 5 to 10 right now installed, it's taken a while for the planning side. We should be seeing more and more level 2 charging coming up in the Twin Cities as public and also curbside, meaning that you can actually just park on the street and then ideally just charge in and plug in your car instead of having to go to, say, like a parking lot or kind of somewhere else off the main roads. So that's sort of Xcel's first and biggest pilot that they proposed. They've also proposed a few EV residential charging programs. This is really trying to get homeowners or other people living in single family homes the ability to charge their electric vehicles and incentivizing them to charge these electric vehicles at times that are better for the grid, such as overnight. So Xcel has something called an overnight time of use rate that allows cheaper charging overnight. So gets people to charge overnight, and they can do that either by installing a separate meter at their home, which works for some homes great, but can be pretty expensive for other homes because it requires dropping a line from electrical line from a utility pole down to your garage. And depending on where your garage is and how far it is from your utility line, it can be kind of a long distance and that add costs. So Xcel also has offered a program that where you can get the overnight cheaper electricity rates through a charger. And you can get this charger approved from Xcel, and they'll come in and help you install it. And they'll even pay for it up front and then charge you over time back when you bill to pay it off. So it's really a great option for those who live in a single family home to be able to install charging in their own garage and even have Xcel charge, pay for the charger and be able to pay that back over time while still seeing some savings from that cheaper electricity rate. They also, for those of us living in multifamily units like myself, they launched a multifamily EV charging pilot earlier this year as well. They got approval from the commission about a year and a half ago, or actually a year ago at this point. And that charging pilot is actually going to be doing a few things. One is going to be looking at the different types of multifamily units out there and determining, is this a market rate unit? Is this a affordable housing unit? And depending on which of the two it is, providing a certain amount of funding to support installing EV charging at those locations in the shared parking spaces of those buildings. So it's really exciting from our perspective because really Xcel stepping up and understanding that not every multifamily housing owner or property owner needs the same things, and that affordable housing needs more support, and the utility has a place to provide more of that support in terms of providing the funding upfront to pay for the charging infrastructure. Also recognizing that just by installing charging stations at certain multifamily housing isn't by itself going to solve the issue of access and equity. It gets you a step there. They've also partnered with Our Car again to pilot a EV car sharing program where Our Car will provide the EVs that will be actually staying and sort of living at different multifamily housing units so that the residents and the tenants of those properties can then use that electric vehicle to get around. And Xcel will have provided the charging stations through this pilot. It is in its early stages. As I understand it, there is a few housing units already chosen and they're getting set up, but we'll hopefully learn more in like the next 6 months to a year on how that's going. And finally, Xcel has also done a fleet EV pilot. This is really meant to support fleet owners like transit agencies and other municipal fleet owners in figuring out how to buy electric vehicles and what they need to do for charging. It's proven really successful for the few participants that have been able to partake in it to date, and they've actually recently, through a commission decision, are able to expand it to more participants who are nonprofit or public. They have not yet allowed this to be given to private entities, but we're hoping that the commission will sort of find out, approve in the future at some point a role for Excel to support private entities also trying to figure out this transition. So that's Excel Energy. They've done the most by far, I will say. So next you have Minnesota Power. They also have that separate metered EV rate, as I mentioned, that Excel does. They kind of went a different route for the residential charging program. Instead of having folks sign up and then get charged a cheap electricity rate, they're actually having their residents sign up for a rewards program where they track how much electricity that their cars are using, and then they get paid a reward amount from Minnesota Power. And if they're charging overnight, then they get a higher amount of reward. So Minnesota Power is doing a little bit different, which is interesting, and we'll see how that works. And they're also providing rebates up to $1,000 for their charger, for residents who install the chargers at their residences, which is also pretty exciting. All these programs I'll mention are they're really exciting, but they're fairly small. Most of them are in pilot stage. So it's, at most like 150 people can participate in each one of these. The exception is that Excel approved charger program I mentioned, that did get approval to turn into a permanent program last year. But most of these are pilot programs and they're fairly small dollars. And that's significant because we'll sort of talk about what needs to come next. And one of the things that needs to come next is figuring out how to expand these programs into full-fledged programs. Minnesota Power finally also got approval from the Public Utilities Commission to install a fast charging network, what they call a backbone, to help support kind of the bare minimum charging network in the region so that more EV drivers have confidence and they feel like they can get around the region with enough charging available. And finally, Otter Tail Power, they're great, very small, very lean. They've also proposed a fast charging network for the same reason as Minnesota Power, to kind of give like the minimum viable network for their customers. They by far have the least number of EVs in the region, just by the nature of being more rural, but they are thinking ahead and really making sure they get ahead of the EV adoption curve. Okay, last slide, I promise. So that's everything that utilities have done. There's a lot more that they still can do. For one thing, a bring your own charger EV program is still needed by Excel and other groups. Right now, Excel will provide you a charger, but if you already have your charger, they're not allowing you to come in and participate in their programs. And we see that as a thing we need to change. So we'll be petitioning the commission to do that. Also, just more and varied EV charging solutions for multifamily housing units and renters. While charging at a unit makes a lot of sense in some cases, in some other cases for older homes, especially or older multifamily housing buildings, it might not make sense to actually charge it at the site. So instead, having more public charging nearby in the neighborhoods, level 2, so that people who live in multifamily housing units can still park nearby and then come back to the residences easy. That could be another solution. We want to see utilities start thinking more about how they can address this segment of the market. Finally, just doing a little bit more around medium and heavy duty EV charging. They've, through their fleet pilot programs, both Minnesota Power and Excel have actually worked with their transit agencies, Duluth Transit and Metro Transit, to identify how they can support EV charging of their buses, which is really exciting. But there's a lot more medium heavy duty buses or medium heavy duty vehicles out there, like school buses, that each of these utilities have a role to play in. And so we're hoping that they'll be proposing more programs related to that in the near future. And then finally, thinking a bit bigger picture. As I mentioned, supporting EV charging by itself is not going to necessarily overcome all the barriers to accessible and affordable electric vehicle access. So in addition to kind of figuring out on the vehicle side through like the EV car sharing or vehicle rebates, we can also think about what other barriers exist for homeowners or dwellers to actually install charging at their homes. And that could be as simple as needing more financial support to upgrade their home wiring, or figuring out how to upgrade the nearby distribution system so they can take on more electric vehicle charging. So those are things that we've asked Excel to consider, and we know that they are considering that specifically in their next batch of proposals. All right, and that is it from us. I would be remiss if I didn't share this slide from our comms folk. We share a lot of details through blog posts and other updates. So if you want to stay connected to what Fresh Energy is doing, feel free to email us or text that number and you can join our monthly listserv. With that, I will hand back over to Mags.
Well, I'm actually going to give it to Pallavi to hear it.
Okay. Thank you so much, MK and Anjali. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put in the chat or say out loud. We're probably going to have to keep it pretty quick because Daniel has to leave. So, yeah.
No, that was a lot, I know. If anyone has questions, follow up, please feel free to, share, either email myself or MK, and we're happy to answer anything too.
And we'll have time for a broader discussion at the end. So if you're just percolating on all that amazing information, it won't be the last time you get to ask. Yeah, if there's no burning questions.
Okay. So I guess next up we have Dan Trajano, a volunteer from MN350, and he will be discussing information on bus electrification and how to get involved. So thanks so much, Dan, for coming here so last minute. So take it away.
No, absolutely. My pleasure. Can you hear me? I lost my controls, but good. All right. I think my screen is sharing there. So I'm Dan Trajano. I'm actually a physician, family physician, geriatrician. I've been retired from practice for quite a while. I moved into a lot of leadership and population health and quality at Park Nicollet and some other health systems, and ended my career with payer organizations doing quality and population health and provider relationships and payment reform. But I did retire a couple of years ago from employed work. I do some consulting work, very minimally part-time, and I'm teaching at the university and at University of St. Thomas as well. But a lot of my time is spent with groups organizing around climate, and particularly with MN350. And there is a chapter down here in the South Metro. We live in Savage, the South Metro Climate Majority Project, where we did a good amount of election work in 2020 and got a climate champion in the state Senate in our district, unseating a climate denier that had been our senator for quite a while. So that was really successful, and we're still involved with Lindsay Port down here. But we shifted our focus in the past little over a year now towards electric school buses. And I just want to present some of the information we've learned about why this really makes sense. And particularly now with the federal bipartisan infrastructure law in place, the funding is sitting there for us to grab as well. So it makes economic sense as well. But from a health professional standpoint, I think that video spelled it out really, really well. And for kids riding in diesel buses, where the particulate matter inside of that bus, particularly the older buses, can be 15 times the amount that's in the ambient air, and they're riding that bus for 13 years of their life back and forth to school, and particularly those environmental justice communities that rely on that kind of transportation throughout their school life. The health impacts are horrible. There's good, solid research on the academic impacts as well, and obviously the climate impacts. And we as physicians and health professionals in this group know that climate change is probably the biggest public health urgency throughout the globe, and how we contribute to that is really an emergency. So buses make a lot of sense because of all of that, and school buses make a lot of sense. So we've been going around and trying to engage with our local school boards down here on getting electric school buses. And we show them, the health impacts, and there's really solid research out there. The Physicians for Social Responsibility out in Oregon have a really nice summary white paper with all the references showing that diesel emissions cause all sorts of health problems, and that particulate matter that gets into lungs can obviously irritate lungs, and the black carbon and all of the pollutants. But the particulate matter is so small it actually flows through the bloodstream from the lungs and causes all sorts of systemic problems, like the video pointed out, heart disease and strokes. But for kids, cancer and childhood leukemia is associated with these diesel emissions. And then, really importantly, because teachers, particularly teachers of childbearing age, or parents that are bringing their kids to school or waiting by the bus stop with their kids that may be pregnant, there is solid research that maternal impacts are significant when you have a lot of exposure to diesel and particulate matter. Birth anomalies, higher incidences of ADHD and autism in the children that are born with those exposures. So a lot of it on the health side makes so much sense. I'm going to point you to a couple studies, and the references are in the back of this deck, and I posted the link to this deck in the chat there. But a couple of studies that compared kids riding in cleaner buses that were retrofitted to sort of filter out a lot of the diesel emissions that get into the cab, or use catalytic converters to somehow convert and not get as much particulate matter coming out of the tailpipe. Comparing kids that got to ride in these sort of retrofitted, still having some diesel exposure. They're not zero emission, but they had technology that would sort of prevent a lot of it from getting inside of the cab of the bus. And comparing that to kids that were riding in those older buses that weren't retrofitted. Long-term studies, multiple years, and one done by the University of Michigan and kids out in Washington State, about 275 kids. And their outcomes they looked at were lung function and lung inflammation tests and school absenteeism, significantly better when you get those kids less exposed to diesel emissions. And then the really more convincing study was across Georgia, where they multiple, it was like 750 children total, and about 200,000 of them, or some, 750,000 children total, about 200,000 of them were riding in these newer retrofitted buses. And comparing those outcomes, it was about a 10-year study. They looked at academic performance across the state, and those kids that were riding in those buses did significantly better, especially younger kids, and with English scores, but also with math scores, not quite as significant, but English scores in particular. They also looked at lung function, and because across Georgia, I guess they do these fitness testing on kids all the time, so they could actually do this, and their lung function, their lung capacity was significantly better too. So lots, in terms of a children's health issue, electric school buses make so much sense for a group like this, and for me as a health professional. And when we show this stuff to school boards and to the public, no one can argue with, wow, that's significant, and we need to do something different. And obviously the climate benefits, when you talk about large, medium-sized vehicles, including buses, we have about 500,000 school buses across the U.S. And if we're to transition all of those, that's 5.2 million tons of carbon that won't go out in the atmosphere. And I think we are on the track to transition all of those. I'll talk a little bit about the funding that is now coming very quickly, that I'm hoping we can get our Minnesota schools prepared to make sure that our students in Minnesota get this opportunity. So this is just a slide from one of my presentations. Ms. Frizzle saying, there's $5 billion of rebates coming, but if you don't apply, you can't win those. And that's my fear right now, is that these rebates, the EPA is saying that the applications are going to start at the end of the month, and our schools are not yet geared up to understand what that means. And it's a lot of potential money for Minnesota. I've been on the regional EPA calls as well. We're in a 5-state region. They say that this is going to fund, potentially 2,500 buses across 5 states. Our share of that is 500 buses. That's a lot of buses that are fully funded, free for these schools and school bus transportation folks. They're free. The major pushback we get at school boards is, well, yeah, these buses are on an upfront basis, 3 to 4 times as expensive upfront as a diesel bus. But over the lifespan of that bus, about 13 years, the fuel costs, the maintenance costs can be $4,000 to $10,000 less than having to fill those buses with diesel and all the moving parts in a combustion engine that break down. So it is close to parity when you look at the life of a bus, but the upfront cost is always the issue. But these rebates will make those buses free. And I think a success would be, here in 2022, Minnesota gets 100 buses fully funded from the federal infrastructure bill. Failure would be is we don't get 100 schools to apply. So we're gearing up to try to support schools across the state for us in the South Metro, and we actually are going to meetings in the school boards here coming up in the next few weeks. Monday is down in Prior Lake that I'm going to be presenting at. So hopefully we'll get them engaged and get their folks engaged. But the MPCA, many of you may know, many may not know, but they did have grants from the Volkswagen settlement that were just distributed this past year. They're not talking about 100 buses. They're talking about, they gave away, I think 8 buses across these schools. And they still have another 2.6 million to go. And those Volkswagen settlement dollars will fund another, dozen buses. But it's the federal program, the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's the big one. That's $5 billion across 5 years. And that is literally potentially hundreds of buses. We couldn't get our school boards to apply for those EPA grants. I think maybe 10 school districts applied for those grants. I don't know how we're going to get 100 schools to say, hey, we want a free bus if they are not yet prepared to do so. So there's lots of information at the EPA website here about that, and we're going to point them to that. There are some things that they need to do to get ready right now. The details of the rebate program for 2022 are not yet set, but they are due to be set, and those applications are due to be out starting at the end of April. And on the regional call, they said, yeah, they're usually open for 3 months. There's lots of information about what they should do. There's webinars that I've been attending. There's newsletters that they'll email you. But one of the main things they recommend is, the school bus transportation folks responsible they need to build that fleet inventory about, what buses are on the road, what's their route, what's their size, how many students, how old is that bus, and how much mileage is it going? Because, certain buses will do well with electrification and qualify, if they're older buses, for this replacement rebate. So we need to know what buses they are. And they need to connect with the local utility, because there's lots of opportunity there for partnership. Virginia, I think Dominion Energy in Virginia is paying for hundreds of buses for their schools. And I think that the payback to them is they can actually use that bus battery for peak energy times. You think about a bus that isn't running in the summer and the air conditioner are flipping on. They can charge those buses overnight, sell that energy back to the utility. Because they have the technology to vehicle to grid, where they can actually do two-way transfer of electricity power back into the grid. And when they do that economic model, those buses become revenue generators for schools. I don't know if our schools yet have these unique IDs, but there is a process to get this unique federal ID in order to get those rebates. So we need to point them to that, and information is on the website there. If you don't apply, you're not going to get it. And that's my biggest fear, is that we need work to convince these Minnesota schools to say, hey, there's free buses available for you soon. And if you don't apply, they're going to go to different states. On some of the calls, we know that, states like California, New York, Colorado, their governors are actively involved in making sure that they are going to have enough applications out there to get their quota. No state can get more than 10% of the money. But from what I hear, these states are geared up to make sure they get the full 10%. I don't yet hear that from Minnesota. We actually just met with the governor's staff this week, and they don't seem really excited about promoting this quite yet. So we're trying to convince them. So here's a few things that we're recommending. And one is really easy, and you can do this right now, mn350.org/plugin. We are working with the governor to join, I think it's now maybe 16 or 17 other states. We have the clean car standard, but there's a real need for heavy and light and heavy and medium duty trucks and buses to set goals and standards for that. And several states have signed on to this memorandum of understanding to actually say, yeah, we're going to set specific goals to get medium and heavy duty trucks and buses electrified. And our governor has yet not done that. And I know MN350 has continued to meet with the governor's staff on that. But you can actually very simply click on that mn350.org/plugin and send the governor a note. It's really easy. It'll take you a minute. If you want to put a little more information about why you care about this, you can free type in the message. If you're a health professional, you can talk about the health impacts of diesel. And that's pretty powerful too. And I know he's received probably hundreds of these letters. The more he receives, the more attention. It really works. When there is a inbox or mailbox full of messages from constituents, it does make a difference. What we're doing down here is we're meeting with local school boards. We have a meeting with Prairie Lake on Monday. We're going to Apple Valley, Egan, Rosemont next week, I think, and then the Burnsville, Savage, Egan School District the following week. We're also working on trying to get some folks from Lakeville. So we're the South Metro. We've been meeting with the school boards talking about the benefits. We're now trying to meet with them to talk about the funding, these free buses that they can actually get. So if you're interested in learning more, my email is there. I put my email and these slides in the chat as well. These slides are full of links. You click on the links to get to those websites and that information. So I will stop there, open it up to your questions, and the references are here. And in addition, there's a folder that you can click on that has all of those papers as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. So I know you have to leave soon, but I think we have a couple of questions. Looks like Mike is raising his hand.
Yeah, hi, Daniel. That was a tremendous presentation. Thank you for
Yeah,
doing that.
yeah, feel free to use it in any way you want. It's
Yeah.
out there. It's open to you.
So
Yeah.
my question is, do some school districts contract their bus services outside of their district so that does that make it more difficult then to apply for these grants?
That question actually came up on the regional EPA call just this week. The challenge is we don't yet know the specifics of who can qualify for these first rounds of rebates. This first round of the $1 billion is going to be a rebate program run by the EPA, and the specifics are not yet there. My assumption is that, and in the law, they allow for all sorts of people to apply for these, all sorts of organizations apply for these rebates, but this specific year is run by the EPA. My assumption is that whoever's providing that school bus transportation can apply for these rebates, but we don't yet know the specs, and they will be coming out though by the end of the month. So there's a lot to learn in a short period of time. Yeah, and our school district down here, they use Schmidt & Sons Transportation as well as Burnsville and Lakeville. We've met with them. They actually had an electric school bus that was a joint project with Dakota Electric. They have one that's in use today, but I think their excuse of, well, we just bought a bunch of new buses and they're too new to qualify. Most of them are too new to qualify. We don't yet know the specifics of what this program is either on which buses qualify. And then, pushback from the schools has been, well, they cost so much and is it too cold? And there's lots of now experience with these in cold states. And again, if you qualify for a rebate, the rebates are supposed to fully fund the complete cost of that bus and potentially the infrastructure to charge it. But the specifics are not yet there. And I would follow that EPA website, which is constantly being updated, and get on those webinars and get on that listserv where they'll send you updates.
So I think, sorry, we had one more question. Two more questions. Oh no, one. Okay. One from Alex. If a school district receives an EV bus, how do they decide where the bus will go? Mm-hmm. And then which school and which route for that specific school? Environmental justice can certainly apply here. Any insight on that?
Yep, absolutely. And environmental justice does apply, and you'll see right in that website, if you click into, there's a fact sheet there about the infrastructure law and the priority schools. They will prioritize tribal schools, rural schools, and I think low income population schools in granting rebates. Again, the real specifics aren't there. They are supposed to come out with a list of which schools are on those priority lists, along with the information that's coming at the end of April. But Not a lot of specs on how they decide which of those schools are priority. I will also say that, you know, it's important, and we need to get all of those environmental justice communities educated on this, because they have the best chance at getting it. But there is so many dollars there. Like I say, it could be 100 buses that come to Minnesota, that virtually any school may be eligible, even the ones that, you know, fall lower on the priority, if we don't get enough schools to apply. So yeah, we would certainly want to prioritize those schools of need the most. And I've done some research in the Burnsville area. I mean, there's some disparity population in Burnsville, which is great. I think almost 50% of the households in the Burnsville School District are non-English speaking, and receive support for school lunches. So I'm hoping that school district to be on the list. And if they're not, we just need to figure out, well, how does the federal government decide who makes a priority list? Was there a second question in there?
No, I think it was just a comment from Anjali, but
Yeah.
are there any other questions, Mike?
Yeah, one more, and then I guess I'm going to have to leave also. But Daniel, so there is no promotion for this program through the governor's office, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, or the Minnesota Department of Education. Am I reading that correctly?
Not a lot that I'm aware of. So I don't know. We met with the MPCA leadership and the governor staff on Wednesday. I think it was yesterday. I can't remember. These days are flying by, but just this week, they just didn't seem real excited yet to promote this on their part. They pointed us to, you know, they said, well, the American Lung Association is doing a lot. Maybe you can work with them to promote this. MN 350 is gearing up because they know how important this is, particularly with environmental justice communities. And we've done webinars in the community about this. So MN 350 is trying to figure out a plan. How do we promote and support schools to do this? And then we're working, obviously our work is more local. We work in our South Metro area to promote this ourselves as volunteers, going to school boards and saying, hey, this is there. And these next rounds is going to be really focused on, yeah, there's potentially 100 free school buses from federal dollars coming to Minnesota through the infrastructure law, if we go out and apply for it. So that's our message to them this time around, in particular, updates on that. But I'm significantly worried. What you're saying is there's no promotion or awareness of this, like we're hearing in some other states.
I don't think there are any other questions.
Yeah, Mike, please contact me if you have ideas, or anyone. How can we get this done to ensure that we get our kids on these clean, safe, better buses for their health, for their academics, and for the environment? I'll put my email in the chat as well, but it's also in the deck. Always looking for ways to do better. Or if you want to learn about how we started organizing South Metro, connect with me too. So thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
So now we have Alex Burns, who is the Transportation Policy Coordinator at Our Streets Minneapolis, and he will be discussing the Twin Cities Boulevard campaign and other campaigns on improving the infrastructure in the Twin Cities, as well as other ways to get involved.
Yes, thanks, Pallavi, and hello, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all. I have a few slides to do a general update. So, yeah, again, my name is Alex Burns. I use he, him pronouns. I work at Our Streets Minneapolis. Presented before on our work around rethinking I-94, so I'll talk a little bit about that and the latest updates with the Twin Cities Boulevard campaign. But I also wanted to talk about a couple other campaigns that Our Streets Minneapolis has been working on. In general, if you're not familiar, we are a transportation advocacy organization that works to put people first in our transportation system and to create a transportation system that creates the outcomes in climate and equity and environmental justice, economic justice that we want to see, because we know that transportation has touches all of those areas. And so in terms of some specific projects that we're working on, and I'm going to try to cover a lot here and just set my timer to make sure I am prompt. But I'll start with a local campaign issue that we are tracking right now, which is the Hennepin Avenue South Reconstruction project. And a brief overview, this is a graphic from Hennepin for People, which is a community organization that has been helping to advance this project. So this is the project area. It's in Uptown. It's the western edge of the Wedge neighborhood from Lake Street to Douglas Avenue. And this section of Hennepin Avenue is due to be reconstructed. And these reconstruction projects happen about once every 50 years. And this should have happened last year, but for a variety of reasons, this process has been delayed. But now Public Works has brought forward this proposal for a layout that would be pretty visionary and pretty progressive in terms of street design for Minneapolis streets, because it really is a complete street. And what a complete street means is that it provides infrastructure for all users to safely and comfortably and efficiently access the public right of way. And how this section of Hennepin Avenue would do that, as you can see here, is it would have wide sidewalks, it would have off-street protected bikeways, it would have dedicated 24/7, which I think is really critical, bus lanes, and then also space for people driving as well. So it would really take, I don't have a picture of the status quo right now, but if you ever spend any time in Hennepin, it is kind of a car sewer and not a whole lot else. And so this would flip that paradigm. It would invest in transportation modes that we know are not only better for the climate and better for environmental justice outcomes, but also modes that we know that are most accessible for folks that can't afford a car or that struggle due to a disability as well, because not only is transit important for the 10% of the Minneapolis population that has a disability, but also these bus-only lanes would service metro mobility, which is a critical service for that population as well. So in terms of where we're at with this project timeline, again, this should have been done already, but we've seen a delay and a significant pushback from the business community along Hennepin Avenue South, and they are concerned about the loss of parking, even though the parking that would be lost represents about 10% of the parking in the immediate area. That pushback has been significant, and it's resulted in the final layout being hanging in the balance, which is unfortunate. And in a meeting at the end of March of last month, the final layout, which would all but seal that those features that I mentioned would be included, was delayed. And it's uncertain when the design is going to be brought back to Public Works for final approval. And the decision really rests right now with the Public Works Director, Margaret Anderson Kelleher. So what we're asking for, and we have an email action, and I'm not sure if it's in the chat, but I'm sure Mags is on it, is to send an email. And we use Action Network, so it's really easy. You just type in your name and your email address and a couple other pieces of contact info. It'll automatically send an email that you can edit and customize to all the key decision makers. And that'll be a theme throughout my words today, is that there's lots of opportunities to take action that you could do just sitting at home right now while I'm talking. So this is the first one. We're asking Public Works to bring this layout to the City Council. And then we're asking for council members and Mayor Fry, who are the decision makers on this project, to issue public statements of support for this design. And I think we're feeling good about it overall, but until this happens, there is concern that this delay is being used to water down core features, especially those 24/7 bus lanes. I think those are at most risk of being removed and being converted to some type of like part-time bus lane or parking. So this is really a critical time for this project, and we're hoping to get it over the finish line soon. The next update I wanted to talk about is with our Bring Back 6 campaign for Olsen Memorial Highway. Again, I'm going through these things super quickly, but I'm happy to answer questions and share more resources about these different projects. So for quick context, Olsen Memorial Highway was the first urban highway built in the Twin Cities. And this was built through what used to be 6th Avenue North. And this is an image of the removal sale for a business on 6th Avenue North in the 30s when Olsen Memorial Highway was about to be constructed. Like a lot of other highways across the country, like I-94, which I'll talk about soon, 6th Avenue North was a thriving, primarily Black and also Jewish-owned business corridor and residential corridor. And it was compared to, it was referred to as the Beale Street of the North. So it was actually a hub of Twin Cities jazz culture. There's a lot of bars and restaurants and things like that here. And it was the heart of the near North community. And it was demolished to make way for Olsen Memorial Highway. And so the result of that has been this highway, which is pictured here, which has continued to pollute and divide and to be really unsafe for the people that live along this corridor. And so we've been working with the Harrison Neighborhood Association to, which this GIF is a bit distracting, but to bring immediate multimodal and safety improvements in the near term to address what is a really dangerous corridor that takes people's lives every year because of this unsafe infrastructure. So we're asking for things like narrowing the travel lanes, adding bus-only lanes, adding places to bike, better marking the crosswalks, making them ADA accessible, shortening the crossing distances, things that MnDOT could do with some paint and some plastic sticks that could be pretty cheaply and nimbly funded and implemented. And in the long term, we've been working with them to create this vision that we're calling Bring Back 6th, which would be, this is just kind of like an artist rendering of what that could look like, but it would be reclaiming this highway corridor to restore this vibrant, locally owned commercial corridor that existed there before. And so we actually have some really exciting events coming up for this. And these in particular, we have these walking tours coming up this weekend. We're going to be meeting and starting at Sumner Library, and they are this Sunday at 2, and then also Sunday, April 24th at 2 p.m. And they will include a walking tour of the corridor, talking a lot about the history and where these different landmarks used to exist and the ones that still remain, and then also kind of this broader Bring Back 6 campaign and the vision for that. We're also hosting an accountability forum and a public neighborhood forum to talk about the recent updates with this campaign and next steps. That is going to be held virtually on May 4th, and there is a registration link where you can sign up to join that. We're inviting all project decision makers to join, to hear directly from the community, and also to respond to these immediate asks. And then maybe the most exciting event that we have coming up, super cool. We are partnering with not only Harrison Neighborhood Association, but also some researchers at the University of Minnesota to set up a mobile museum in Harrison Park, which is right next to the highway, to tell the history in a way that folks can walk through and learn the history about 6th Avenue North outside in kind of like this block party-like environment. And then also share their ideas and help imagine like what 6th Avenue North could look like if MnDOT converted it back into a local street and business corridor. So really exciting. These are it's the same team that did the 35W exhibit at the Hennepin History Museum, which was excellent if anyone made it to that. So we are really looking forward to this. Hopefully the weather will finally be nice when that happens. But that's coming up on May 15th from 1 to 4. And then finally, I think I'm running a little over time, so I'm going to try to go through this quick. The Twin Cities Boulevard, which is our campaign for the Rethinking I-94 project. This is the project that will determine the future of I-94 between Minneapolis and St. Paul. The Twin Cities Boulevard is a vision similar to Bring Back 6, but like a reparative justice vision for the entire project corridor to remove the highway and to replace it with a multimodal boulevard and reconnected street grid. And this includes like returning the surrounding land back to communities via for community guided investment. And there's a few strategies that we've outlined similar to Bring Back 6 on how that could be done. And then in addition to that, implementing policies and benchmarks to make sure that this transformation doesn't create more displacement and gentrification, that is actually repairing these historic and ongoing harms. And all the information about this can be found on twincitiesboulevard.org, but I'll talk about some of the asks and the ways that you can all take action on this issue. So just for additional context, we wanted to show people what the future of this corridor could look like without a highway. So we were able to work with some designers that had done highway to boulevard conversions in other cities. And they were able to draw up a design or kind of like a high level overview of just what this could look like in this specific corridor, and making sure that it's plausible from a transportation standpoint that this is actually something that could work. So this is what that looks like. The Twin Cities Boulevard could transform transportation options in this corridor by adding a bikeway and linear park space and a dedicated transit way in the middle of it, returning that surrounding land for new housing and businesses and green space. And on a more like human scale level, this is the rendering that they created for the Seward area near Seward Tower West. And there we go. This is what it could look like with the Twin Cities Boulevard. And so right now what we are, one last thing for context, this is the existing street grid in that area. So this freeway is not only incredibly harmful in terms of the emissions and the pollution that it creates, but it divides Seward and Cedar Riverside. And so with the Twin Cities Boulevard and a reconnected street grid, it would stitch these neighborhoods back together. And so we've been out door knocking about this project. I think this is a photo from our Canvas launch in February. Since it launched in late February, we've knocked 2,500 doors. We've been out about 20 hours a week, and you're always welcome to join us for that. And what we're asking in the near term, and I'll focus mostly on the near term, MnDOT is expected to come out with the project alternatives for the Rethinking I-94 project. Project alternatives being the project options to be considered. Right now, they're not at that step of the process, but they're expected to be there in like fall or around probably late fall is when those options will come out. So we feel like it's really important that a highway to boulevard conversion is on the table when those options come out. So that's what we're asking project partners to do. And also to amend these project documents called the purpose and need documents, which I talked about last time I was with you all. These project documents are going to be amended, which is good, but we haven't seen them yet. We're expecting them before June. So it's really important that it allows for fair consideration of an alternative like this, because otherwise, if it's just about moving more car and truck traffic, a highway to boulevard conversion is unlikely to be given that opportunity. And then the last near-term ask, and the last thing I'll say today is that this is related to IIJA funds as well, because there was $1 billion set aside for a Reconnecting Communities program in the federal infrastructure bill. And this includes small grants up to $2 million to help cities study highway removal or mitigation projects. And so this is a golden opportunity for the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul to come together united and get resources to study this, to study the Twin Cities Boulevard and what it could look like and how it could work. And so we are urging city decision makers to apply for this funding. We expect that the program is going to finish rulemaking and launch in May, with applications ending in September. So in terms of how you can help, by signing the petition, sending an email, volunteering with us if you'd like, that really helps to generate that, to demonstrate that public interest that this is something that should be studied and should be considered. And then also we have a survey where you can share your priorities and your thoughts, and we've been inviting everyone to share their priorities for this Twin Cities Boulevard vision, because again, this is really just a high level vision for what this corridor could look like without the freeway, and we anticipate it will continue to grow and change with that community feedback. So I definitely went over time, but here's my contact information, and I'm happy to answer questions, but don't hesitate to reach out.
Yep, thank you so much, Alex. Is there any questions in the chat? Nope.
I have a question for Alex, if you don't mind.
Of course.
So I'm curious, so when you said that to get Minneapolis and St. Paul to apply for the EJ funding, I'm actually curious, like, is this something where we talk to city council members to get them to like submit a joint application? Is it, would MnDOT still be coordinated, or is like a Metro Council ask?
Yes, great question. So there's a few different pathways, and the rulemaking is still ongoing. So we'll see what it shakes out. But like with the latest update that I heard, they have structured this program in a way which is super smart, because they don't trust the DOTs to actually do the legwork on these concepts. And so they know that MnDOT is not alone. Like a lot of, they're worried that the departments of transportations won't be good partners in actually utilizing these funds to like really study an alternative that could compete with their highway priorities. And so MnDOT is really not that important as a partner here. What is important is that there's either city support, so it's either eligible for cities or MPOs. So it's kind of like, I mean, ideally we would have both, and we've been meeting with Met Council members to try to get them to write a letter of support. But I feel like the best path forward is going to be through the cities, which have demonstrated support. There's at least like real champions in both cities for this idea. So in terms of like how that would work in the city, you mentioned the city council. I think that's going to be really important because they're the ones that will have to ultimately approve the ask. But our understanding is that in both cities, it's going to have to be a staff decision to apply that gets approved by the city council. So staff is really, especially now in Minneapolis, like responds to the mayor. So we've made sure that Mayor Fry is on that target list too, so that he knows that this is something worth applying for. I hope that's helpful.
That is helpful.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So I don't see any other questions, and if there are any, we have a larger Q&A session. So Kathleen, if you want to say your final words.
Oh yeah, thanks. Thank you, everybody. There's so much going on in transportation. It's amazing. So I wanted to say a couple words about the funding packages that MK mentioned that are being considered by the legislature and tried to capture the IIJA funding by providing state match. And Dan mentioned the $5 billion in transportation funding. And there's also 200 million in competitive grants that the Department of Commerce and other departments can apply for. And the House Omnibus Bill is an $80 million bill that provided for funding for competitive grants. It's got all kinds of stuff in there, money for solar for schools, EV charging infrastructure, zero emission buses, all kinds of stuff. And the Senate bill doesn't have that state match in there. So they're going to be going to conference committee after the break, which is next week. And there'll be some decisions being made. So we would like to see if there are any health professionals. Obviously, this is a small group here. We had other people registered, and we'll let them know too. To do some earned media, like people can do op-eds about why this is really important for our health, healthy communities, for our own personal health, clean transportation, and the other investments that are in the House bill that we would like to see passed by the state legislature. And I also, we can let folks know about the school bus program, and maybe we can encourage through an action alert, we can encourage folks to actually contact their school district and try to get the funding for an EV bus. And we'll also follow up with everybody as far as some of the other action alerts that we're talked about today.
Thank you, Kathleen. So I guess now we can shift to the Q&A session if anyone has any lingering questions.
I had a question for Anjali and MK. Has Fresh Energy taken a position on the VMT fee? Or like it's VMT, right? Like the mileage taxation or fee structure?
So the mileage-based user fee for EVs. Yeah, it's well, we wouldn't have really thought of this as a priority amidst everything else we do around electrification, because it has come up several times, both from Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate. We've felt compelled to weigh in, and right now our position is not to do anything kind of hastily or just kind of out of pocket, is to really look at a task force or a study and think about what is needed, not just for electric vehicles, but really think about the entire transportation system of what are we incentivizing, how are we actually supporting transportation infrastructure funding holistically, and not just looking at EVs, which are such a small portion that they're not the problem. There's a lot of reasons why our roads are underfunded, and then thinking about what else can we incentivize with a new sort of gas tax or mileage-based user fee beyond just funding roads and bridges. Is it something we could, if we did a task force study, could we actually think about putting in funding sources for other sort of more climate-specific provisions in our transportation system, and things like climate resiliency or redesigning the way we move around, so it's not just focused on such a narrow thing of like getting money to rebuild roads, which is why we support a task force or study. And I know that's gone to the House. Senate Representative Hornstein, I know, has sort of supports the task force, so we're going to have to see what comes the next few weeks to the conference committee.
Thank you so much. So are there any other questions?
Alex, I had one question for you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
I'm just curious if anybody has done a cost analysis of leaving the highway the way it is, except preparing the surface and turning it into a tunnel and building the city on top of it.
That is, so it's a great question. The answer is no in terms of a cost analysis, but I think it's something that that's a priority for us and for this campaign, and something that we're hopeful that these IIJA funds could help provide, just like a high level overview of the cost, of these different alternatives of it sounds like you're kind of proposing something similar to like a big dig scenario and,
Yeah, just like the Boston experience, I think they've been pretty impressed with how well that worked after spending a lot of time and money on it.
certainly, yeah. And I think that's the key point, it was a great outcome, but those types of like burying and cap scenarios, even on a small scale, but on a big scale like that can be super expensive. But I think it's important to like lay that out in context so that people can have a good sense of the alternatives.
Yeah, and in particular, because in Minneapolis, the dig is already done.
For sure.
That highway is below grade. And so covering it wouldn't be the huge structural challenge that it was in Boston.
Yeah, I think it is important to point out that a lot of the reason that highway to boulevard conversions are gaining steam in some cities that you would maybe not expect it, like in Detroit, for example, which just approved a highway to boulevard conversion on I-375, is because it's actually more cost effective in a lot of scenarios to fill in the trench, because most of the ongoing infrastructure cost, especially when you're talking about a reconstruction, isn't from just the pavement, but it's the bridges and it's the retaining walls that are super expensive, especially when you're talking about a big urban corridor like that. And so while there is an upfront cost to bringing it back to surface level, it ends up saving money in the long run. And Rochester, New York did the same thing with their inner loop on I-490 for similar reasons, because they just couldn't afford to keep maintaining that infrastructure. But that being said, I don't have specific numbers on like for I-94 because that's just not an analysis that's been conducted yet. But I think it would be really good to have that data to help inform this decision making. It's a really good question.
And Angeli and MK, I have a question for you about the role of Xcel Energy in electrification. Number one, I agree that they're trying hard, but number two, I think that it's important to realize, and I want you to comment on it if you could, that what they are doing is that they are using currently available funds to do this. And those funds are severely limited. I applied on behalf of the River Station Condominium Association for the phase one of this multi-unit EV infrastructure construction project. And in the River Station Condominium Association, we had an unbelievable response. Over 40% of our members said, yes, we will buy into this and get a charger installed. So we had 151 applicants in our condominium association saying that they were willing to participate. And they actually came and did a site visit for us to see, wow, that's impressive. Let's see how it's going to work. And they eventually came back to us right at the end of all the decisions they made about the phase one project. And they said, sorry, we're going to reject you because when you have a lot of people doing this, getting the infrastructure built to make up that much electrical, essentially amperage, coming into your buildings at a high enough voltage in order to allow this project to go forward would have cost us more than $1 million. Now, I don't think that that's a ton of money to a huge company like Xcel, but nonetheless, that was a stopping point for them. They said, no, you're too big, too expensive to actually have us fund you. And clearly, if they can't do this kind of infrastructure build out and fund that, you're talking about situations down the road where especially the multi-unit dwellings in underserved neighborhoods where they are going to have to fund everything basically because no one there is going to pay for it at all. are never going to get done. I mean, we're talking not about something that should be done in the next decade and might. We're talking about something that should get done by 250 and never will, if that's the kind of funding opportunities that they think are available to them. Do you think that therefore any kind of short-term realistic solution for companies like Excel exists?
Sure, that's a very interesting data point. Thank you for sharing that. I will, so the pilot program, the multifamily EV charging pilot program, one of its outcomes is actually to find out some of these challenges and barriers. So I would say the experience of the Riverside condominium, that will be going into, and we've actually, as advocates, we're asking Excel to track basically why they denied, however many people they deny, like why do they deny it? What's the reason? So that at the end of the pilot, we know exactly what we need to ask for in terms of a permit program. The reason why they probably said that 1 million was too high for them is that they only got approved for 4 million for the entire pilot. And it is going to be really limited, and they're having to prioritize sort of the easiest possible in the market rate developments. And then on the affordable housing side, they can cover up more of the costs, but they still have to prioritize, just for the sake of making sure the pilot goes as far as possible, those that are the easiest to install, or cheapest. So it's not to say that Excel won't be trying to solve that very issue in the near future. It's just the way they conducted the pilot was to get some of this information. So I would say it is probably really frustrating right now, but having them at least even go out and figure out this information, because before they did the pilot, they had no idea. Like I would say they really did not know what differences exist in the market. Everyone sort of says that the multifamily housing unit market is really diverse. It's hard to really come to one conclusion what would work for any one situation. But the outcome of this pilot program is to hopefully at least identify some more patterns of like, hey, Excel needs more funding. Hey, let's go to the PUC and ask for that more funding and figure out how to pay for it. And what, any additional barriers that come along the way through the process or the implementation side too. So I'm hopeful, especially because we're tracking that one particularly closely. In like 2 years, we'll be at the end of the pilot and we'll have had all these good outcomes. So we can go back to the commission and ask them to make it a full program and figure out how to pay for it. Because it is really important, to your point, like to address this market. And even if it's not installing EV charging at the condominium, making sure there's easily accessible charging around inside it, and things like that is also will be really important. But I know it probably is frustrating, but I'm hopeful in a couple of years we'll have all these outcomes and they'll help Excel design the next phase of a permanent program that the commission can approve.
Well, actually, the commission approved and they're implementing a 4-phase program. This was phase 1, and it's going to be free installation for all those people who needed it. That's why it was $1 million straight out of their pockets, because we weren't going to pay anything. And so, but when I think about all the places where no one's going to be able to pay anything, like I deliver for Meals on Wheels too, and I go to a lot of multi-unit dwellings where I can promise you there isn't one person who's going to pay for it, even if they could afford an electric vehicle in the first place. And actually, multi-unit apartment buildings are a completely different thing from multi-unit condo buildings. The apartment buildings, they can use shared EV charging. In condo buildings, the parking spaces are deeded with the condo. Mm-hmm. So they have to go inside for those. They can't just provide nice charging opportunities outside the condo building. No one would buy into that. So, they're going to have to figure out a way to do it eventually. And clearly, they had no idea what they were getting into, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I just want to note that we're running over time. And so if there's anyone else who has pressing questions, we can definitely hop to them, but I also want to respect people's evenings. Maybe people have other things they want to do with their evenings. Are there any last final thoughts before I wrap us up? Real quick questions. Okay, I'm not going to give the full teacher however many seconds. I really want to thank everyone who stuck through to the end, and I really, really want to thank all of our presenters this evening. Thank you so much for the information it's a wealth of information. I'm really appreciative for all the work that you do. And we will be sending follow-ups to this. And we did have quite a number of folks register who clearly weren't able to make it. So we'll be sending the recording out to them and also the links. Yeah, I mean, Alex, if you're gonna post it in the chat, I might put you on the spot to say something. I did see that. Do you want to bring us home with one last pitch for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks to the speakers tonight. It was a great presentation by all. Thank you so much. This was great. And then just to wrap it up, I just wanted to put in a plug for our upcoming conference, Code Blue for Patient Earth. So that will be our third conference that we've done over the years. We did 2016, 2018, 2020 was canceled, unfortunately, but we're back for 2022 with this conference. It is April 22nd and 23rd. It's over Zoom, though we are having a Friday night event on the 22nd in St. Paul. So I put a link to the website in the chat there. So if you haven't signed up yet, please do. And thanks again, everyone.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll look forward
Thanks,
to talking to you
everybody.
again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Take care.